On this heir to a billion mornings, we gather as a community of blessing and challenge. As have our ancestors down the ages, let us reflect on the greatness which lies all around us. Let us seek insight into our own mysteries and the currents of the world about us. Let us teach, learn, inspire, and be inspired, and then, having reflected on all this sacred text of human experience, may each of us find ink and paper to write our own footnote.
So when I was hearing what Reverend Dennis was going to talk about today, I thought back to when I was a kid and some of the things I heard, because this epistemic injustice is a really big word and it affects a lot of people who are on marginalized communities. And do you know, unfortunately, children still are as well. And children are often not seen or heard or believed. And I remember being told when I was just a little child, children are meant to be seen and not heard. And that was probably part of my beginning of becoming a UU, honestly, when I reflect back on that, because I was like, I have questions. And I think you're supposed to be able to be in conversation with me. Do you guys ever have questions? Yeah. And I think we have questions. Sometimes kids ask us a question like, wow, I never really thought about that. Or I'm not prepared for that question. If I give them too much information, if I give them the wrong information, right? Because we're afraid of messing up. But so this message to the grownups, it's okay to mess up. You know, as Unitarian Universalists, we're anchored in covenant. So if we break a promise, if we misstep, then you have an opportunity to come back to the conversation and say, you know, I've learned something since we last talked, and I think you might have been right. I can hear what you were really asking now. And, you know, anybody here like to read? Is that some of us like to read? Some of us like to listen to audiobooks. Some of us draw and do art and talk. And books can be a really, really pivotal tool. And there's a really interesting thing happening now, especially in children's books, because in children's books, they're gearing it towards those really big, heavy conversations that a lot of adults are scared to engage in with children. And while they may be written at a 7 to 8-year-old level, there's some really good things in there. They've been unpacking words like injustice and racism and gender and sexuality and all these things that we as UUs want to learn and expand our knowledge on, and that we want to learn and expand our knowledge for our kids on. So I thought, anybody have some big summer reading plans? Anybody? Have you guys signed up for the library yet? They usually have a big summer reading program. Thought it might be good to do a little show and share of some of my favorite little kids books. Not little kids, but favorite kids books, so that you can see some ideas and add them to your list, or maybe think about reading with some other people that you know. Anybody want to help show my titles? Or is it all on me? I can do it. No? Okay. Intersectional allies. And we make friends, we make room for all. And so that's a really big thing. They're talking about race, they're talking about religion, they're talking about gender, they're talking about accessibility, they're talking about disability. It's really awesome. And there's also, if you are an educator, there's some really handy information in there for that. All are welcome. This is another really wonderful title. And we hope that anybody who walks in these doors will feel welcome. And how do we welcome people? Any ideas? We wave, we say hello, we say, we are so glad you are here today. Anybody a Joy Harjo fan? This is a great book talking about Indigenous culture and helping to remember ancestors and thinking a lot about the people who came before you and the people who are going to come after you. What you want, with a lot of graduation time right now, people are starting to think about your legacy, what you want to do with this one precious wildlife, as Mary Oliver says. From the stars in the sky to the fish in the sea. Look at that beautiful illustration. This is a book talking about a child who is non-gender conforming and how, with the loving support of their family, they know that whatever they dream of, I believe I can be, from the stars in the sky to the fish in the sea. I've got just a few more. This is Black is a Rainbow Color. Some of us were taught that we weren't supposed to notice differences. We weren't supposed to talk about skin color and acknowledge that this person has darker skin and it's because of melanin and their proximity to the sun. And to lift up this idea that while red is a rainbow color and green sits next to blue and yellow and orange and violet and indigo, they're rainbow colors too. But my color is black. And it's part of the rainbow as well. This is actually written by my friend Matt Meyer, who is a UU musician, and it's inspired by Desmond Tutu, and it's called Desmond Gets Free. And this idea of liberation, we've heard the word liberation theology, that we're not free till everyone's free, right? And what if we didn't hear? Or what if, it's inconvenient for me to act because some people might judge me, but I feel it in my gut, I feel it in my heart, and I don't act. It calls you to action. We rise, we resist, and we raise our voices. Remember that whole children are meant to be seen and not heard? Psh, out the window, okay? Let them hear your voices. Anybody name a child activist right now? Greta, right? Greta's calling for climate action, right? Huh? Malala, who's a grown-up now, but was a kid, right? Little Miss Flint is now a teenager. You know, the kids from school violence are really raising their voices. And actually, this weekend, many kids who were Sandy Hook would have been celebrating graduations. As I celebrated my daughter, I thought about that a lot. And then look, like they make them in really cool board books now. I just wanted to show that. Like A is for activist. A doesn't just have to be for alligator. A can be for activists. You know, boy can be for boycotts, right? There's things we can do, all right? So kids, what I want you to know is that there are trusted adults in your community right here in this room who are going to listen to you, who are going to see you, right? Who are going to hear your voice and who want to believe you. And that is really important. And can I have adults show of hands? Kids, can you stand up and look at the adults who would see and hear and believe you? Okay? You may not have that everywhere you go, but you have that here for sure. And now we will sing our children out to their classes.
I recently returned to the IT field, so I've been thinking a lot about computers. As some of you probably know, computers think in binary code. Binary is a number system that uses only ones and zeros. Every command, every button press on the keyboard, every mouse click on any computer anywhere in the world is ultimately converted to a 1 or a 0 that represents either on or off to the electrical signals inside of the computer. The computer can only understand on or off, true or false, yes or no. It is absolutely certain about everything in its domain. There is no ambiguity, no uncertainty, no gray area. It knows that everything it knows is true. Humans, alas, are not so lucky. We live in a world of uncertainties, contradictions, and difficult decisions. Few issues we grapple with are cut and dry. The human mind, unlike the computer, is able to recognize that multiple things can be true at once. There are often disagreements in which both sides have valid points. In our deeply divided world, it is so easy to completely discount those we disagree with, but that is just our inner computer talking. Embracing our humanity means embracing multiple viewpoints. One potential advantage that the computer has is that it gives equal weight to all information it receives unless it is told to do differently. A 1 or a 0 from one source is just as good as a 1 or 0 from another. It quite literally doesn't care who is pressing its buttons. Humans, on the other hand, usually analyze information based on whom it came from. Sometimes this is quite useful. It would be foolish to take as fact information from a source that has a track record of publishing inaccuracies, for example. And numerous issues have arisen from AI bots doing just that. However, we also often weigh information based on various characteristics of the individual providing the information, like race, gender, socioeconomic status, and even their style of writing or speaking. In this department, we would do well to learn from computers. Not that we shouldn't engage with the full person and respect their identity and background, but we should give equal respect to knowledge and particularly to lived experience, regardless of its source. While the computer gives equal weight to all information, it is still limited because it can only analyze the information it receives from us humans. And we are so biased in our thinking that we are now teaching those biases to the machines we create. For example, it has been shown that software that approves or rejects home loan applications often denies qualified applicants because they live in a zip code with a large minority population. But unlike the computer, we have the opportunity to listen to a range of voices on any given topic. So as we all sit around worrying about whether artificial intelligence is going to take over the world, we might do well to practice the skills that set us apart from computers while also taking some lessons from their behavior. To embrace the ambiguities of life that are messy, to re-examine our biases, and to listen to a variety of voices. And if we keep honing those skills that can't easily be boiled down to ones and zeros, the human race might just be able to stay relevant for a little while longer.
If you're my age or anywhere close to it, you may know that song came from the play, the musical South Pacific. And it was describing a problem that we did not yet have words to analyze. And that's what epistemic justice and injustice are all about. This morning's reading comes from a Washington Post article from last month, and I put a trigger warning on it. It's pretty intense. Brace yourselves if you've been around spousal abuse. But again, this is describing a textbook example of epistemic injustice years and years before anybody ever came up with the term. The problem was there. We just hadn't found terminology to name it. Nicole Brown Simpson dialed 911 in October of 1993 and told the dispatcher that her ex-husband had broken into her home. He wouldn't leave the property, she explained. He's ranting and raving outside in the front yard. And the dispatcher wanted to know whether the man had been drinking, and Nicole said no, but he's gone crazy. And the call ended, and then almost immediately she called again to ask the police to please hurry. Her ex was about to re-enter the house. What does he look like? This new dispatcher asked. It's O.J. Simpson, Nicole said. I think you know his record. And what's remarkable, re-listening to this call, is the resignation in Nicole's voice, the sense that she already knows that providing her famous husband's name might change the treatment she receives or doesn't, the privacy she receives or doesn't, the credibility she is or is not believed to have. Is he the sportscaster or whatever? The dispatcher asked. Yes, Nicole said, and by then she was crying. The sportscaster, who was also a former football star, who was also a famous actor, who was also a beloved cultural icon, was now back in the house. And Nicole said, he's going to beat the S word out of me. She didn't say S word. Along with reading the various obituaries, remembrances, and essays published about O.J. Simpson, who died this week, it's worth going back and listening to Nicole Brown Simpson's 911 calls that night in October, what they told us about her and what they told us about us. On the phone with the dispatcher, Nicole worries repeatedly about her children who are asleep and about how desperately she does not want to wake them up. She explains that O.J. has now broken down her back door, that he's taken her phone book, that he's angry because he wanted to know why one of the bedroom doors was locked, and that he was refusing to leave. Please leave, O.J., Nicole could be heard saying at one point. Please, the kids. So basically, you guys have just been arguing, the dispatcher asked, a question that would be repeated in various forms throughout the call, followed a few beats later by, is he upset with something you did? As if busting down your ex-wife's door and stalking through the house while she begs you to leave was a run-of-the-mill couple's squabble. As if the likeliest explanation for a man behaving this way was that the ex-wife did something to provoke it. We'll have a moment of silence while that settles in. By the time he died last month, football star / TV personality O.J. Simpson was most famous for murdering his wife and another person 8 months after the phone call referred to in this morning's reading. We know more about the cycles of domestic violence than we knew back then, and that lack of knowledge itself is a justice issue. If the public and police had known in 1993 what we know now, it might have been possible to protect Nicole Brown Simpson. Police brutality and racism also played a crucial role in O.J. Simpson's notorious murder trial. We've learned more about that as well. And again, lack of necessary knowledge itself can be a justice issue. Feminist philosopher Miranda Fricker has coined the term epistemic injustice for justice issues related to what we don't know but need to. For the record, epistemology is the study of knowledge, what we know, and how we learn it. Nicole Brown Simpson called the police many times, but she never really got anywhere. People either didn't listen or didn't know how to respond effectively if they did. And that's a textbook example of what Fricker calls testimonial epistemic injustice. Testimonial injustice is about who gets listened to and who does not, and what happens when oppressed people's concerns are not listened to. Nicole Brown Simpson even told the police twice, he's going to kill me. And of course, that's what happened. So the words those big words, testimonial, epistemic injustice, but it plays out every day in real life. At its most minor, testimonial injustice is just frustrating. You're just telling somebody something you really need them to understand, but you're not getting anywhere. They're not listening. And at its most serious, as in this murder case, it can be literally a matter of life and death. Back in 1993, we didn't yet understand that violent abusers are truly dangerous. And we needed stronger laws to protect both the abused partners and also even police officers handling domestic abuse calls. And Fricker's technical term, here's another chain of big words for you. Fricker's technical term for that lack of knowledge is hermeneutical epistemic injustice. So there are two types of epistemic injustice, testimonial and hermeneutical. I'll get back to hermeneutical. But the first point is, partly due to lingering sexism and patriarchal prejudice against battered women, Nicole Brown Simpson's pleas just went nowhere. O.J. Simpson was still a beloved public figure in 1993, and her information could not get past his public image and legal inertia. That's testimonial epistemic injustice, or just testimonial injustice. I chose this case, though, because it gives us interwoven layers of epistemic injustice, because for decades before that, Black citizens in Los Angeles had protested against police racism and police violence. In an age before iPhone videos, again, leaders in city government were not listening to those complaints. That's testimonial injustice on a government-wide basis. Then in 1991, a man with a camcorder recorded a video of LA police officers savagely beating black motorist Rodney King with their nightsticks. The video went viral on the news. The officers were charged with assault, but even video evidence was not enough to convict them. We see and hear, and Adrian kind of mentioned this in the children's message, we see and hear very much according to our social conditioning. Implicit racial bias was not well understood at this time. So responsible citizens, conditioned by the prejudices of the day, listened to defense attorney claims of what was not shown on the video over what the video actually did show. So a jury in the white suburb of Simi Valley found the officers innocent. Testimonial injustice, what we listen to versus what we don't. And when there's an imbalance, it creates injustice. Riots followed that verdict, and a federal court finally did convict the officers of violating King's civil rights. But even then, a white judge gave them lenient sentences, less than half of federal sentencing guidelines for that crime. So when O.J. Simpson went on trial, Los Angeles was boiling with racial tension. White citizens saw the police as protectors, but based on repeated negative experiences, Black citizens saw the police as racist, corrupt, brutal, and dishonest. The Simpson jury was almost all Black and female. The defense attorneys did what any good defense attorney would do. The evidence against Simpson was overwhelming, so they turned the trial into a referendum on the Los Angeles police force. And the evidence was really no more overwhelming than the reality of Black life on Los Angeles streets and city government's failure to listen to that reality. And the jury quickly found Simpson not guilty on the grounds that corrupt LA detectives could have planted the evidence. You might say that testimonial injustice on police brutality resulted in testimonial injustice on the murder evidence. It breaks down to 4 words: people just didn't listen. A national poll found that more than 70% of white citizens nationwide believed Simpson was guilty, but more than 70% of Black citizens considered the LA police and the evidence they gathered too untrustworthy for a conviction. And before you think, that's crazy, how could anyone ignore all that evidence? Ask anyone in Donald Trump's political base what they think of the criminal evidence against him. Our attitude toward facts is very much a result of our social conditioning around those facts. Now, I could write multiple sermons about the O.J. Simpson story. There are so many issues involved in it. But in terms of testimonial injustice, white and Black experiences were so different in the United States 30 years ago, and still too much that way in our own time, that it shaped what white people and Black people saw and heard, even in something that ought to be as cut and dried as hard evidence in a murder case. We need to listen to people who are treated unfairly, whether it be an individual in an unequal relationship or a whole population. That's all testimonial justice is. Listen to the oppressed. Hermeneutical epistemic injustice is a little more complicated. I could spend a half hour just talking about the word hermeneutical, but I won't. Staying with the O.J. Simpson case, we have learned more about racist policing since the Rodney King fiasco. We haven't yet solved the problem, not by a long shot. There is, alas, a racism-shaped hole in the human psyche, and police are human. We have learned, for one thing, how useful video evidence is. Many places now require body cameras, and that protects conscientious officers and helps hold offending officers accountable. The O.J. Simpson murders taught us a lot about domestic violence. The Federal Violence Against Women Act was passed later that same year, as well as state legislation mandating the arrest of the offending partner. Nicole Brown Simpson's family tried to protect her, but neither she nor her family knew as much as they needed to about the dynamics and the cycles of domestic violence. That's part of the hermeneutical justice piece too, how to provide victims of injustice with the information they need to protect themselves. And philosopher Miranda Fricker also talks about one more condition essential to epistemic justice: the right to contest, the right to contest, the right to be heard if you believe you've been unfairly treated. She tells us that the right to contest fundamentally changes a relationship. The more powerful person in the relationship will act differently if they're accountable for their actions toward the less powerful person. Which brings us to the reason I'm sharing all this. It provides a very useful lens on current events in the Unitarian Universalist Association. You probably already know, but just in case someone doesn't, next month's General Assembly, which is online, it's our annual National Summer Convention, will vote on a revision to our National Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws, and if it passes, our 7 principles will no longer be in the bylaws. Some folks don't even know the 7 principles were in our UUA bylaws, but they are. They'll be replaced in the bylaws by 7 values. And I think you've seen this, but I'm just going to repeat it. Some wags are referring to those values as jet pig love. The values are justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, JETPIG, JETPIG, all like petals on a flower around a central value of love at the center. And just for a visual aid, I brought my own JETPIG. Justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. And he's got a little heart on his pocket here. Now, frankly, this may be a significant change as far as our UUA bylaws are concerned, but to be honest, it's not really going to change much in the daily lives of Unitarian Universalists. Our 7 principles are important, not because they're in our bylaws, they're important because they're in people's hearts. And they'll stay there as long as you want them there. But a few people are claiming they're doing away with the 7 principles. I just can't agree with that. It's the same kind of logic to me as the person who claims that if we sanction same-sex marriages, their own straight marriage will be ruined. Please do keep the 7 principles in the narthex in this building. They are, for one thing, a wonderful introduction to a visitor what we're about as a religious tradition. And then you can say to the visitor, hey, if you like those 7 principles, you're going to love this pig. Now, it's totally normal to be a little nervous about a change like this, especially because there's a lot of conversation about it. But again, it's not going to change our week-to-week lives as Unitarian Universalists. The very nature of this faith tradition is that each one of us has to figure out for ourselves what the 7 principles mean in our lives. And it will likewise be up to each one of us to figure out for ourselves what those 7 values mean and what the relationship should be between the 7 values and the principles. Values: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, generosity, and love at the center. That's a rich conversation, something new to talk about and get something out of. The opening statement in the new Article 2 language says in part, and I'm quoting here, love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love, close quote. And I quite like that statement. You can really chew on it. There's some richness there intellectually. If we listen to core opposition to the Article 2 revision, very often the core opposition comes down to the word accountability. People who most strongly oppose the revision really don't like that word. Some have made claims that the UUA is going to come in and take over our congregations and do things, bad things to individual churches if we don't do things according to UUA mandate. That's what accountability means, they claim. And I don't quite accept that either. Even if the UUA wanted to control individual congregations, which they don't, it's way too much work, there's no mechanism to do that. To me, that kind of claim is just propaganda, same as the claim the 7 principles are being thrown out. Those are the kinds of claims to me that belong in advertising and politics, not in a theological discussion in a UUA bylaws change. Just my opinion. But the reason I bring this up, and the reason I bring up epistemic justice and injustice, the accountability piece brings us right back to epistemic justice, because that's really what accountability is: practicing epistemic justice and honoring the right to contest. We need to listen to the voices of the least among us, both in society and within our own religious tradition. And we need to accept the fact that there always is more to learn. That's what epistemic justice is as well. We Unitarian Universalists often think of ourselves as an all-white Euro-American religious tradition, and we mostly are, but not totally. Nationwide, we have thousands of members who are Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous, and/or Black. Class-wise, we think of ourselves usually as mostly white-collar class, and we are, but not totally. I come out of a blue-collar background, and so do thousands of other UUs. We have thousands of LGBTQ members. We have thousands of members with disabilities. We need to listen to their experiences as well. Testimonial justice. So how do we not just accept and tolerate one another, but really honor the pluralism of the diversity we already have? That takes epistemic justice toward members and would-be members who are outside our cultural mainstream. And that lies right at the core of this bylaws revision. If I say something hurtful toward, say, a transgender person or a Black person or toward a woman, and I have to all three at one time or another, even if it's unintentional, they should have the right to tell me so. And I believe that I'm religiously, ethically, and humanly called to listen. We can all learn something. I can certainly learn something. And our record in the UUA on this point has been less than perfect. It's not because we lack good intentions, but the human condition is that we don't know what it is that we don't know until we learn it. That's epistemic justice. The whole 20th century history of this association is a track record of well-meaning but insensitive treatment of our more marginalized members. People of color particularly just learned that there was no use talking about insensitive treatment because it was more likely to blow back on them than to be corrected. In other words, we have a history of testimonial injustice, denial of the right to contest. And we really only began documenting the problem in this century, and it included staffing practices. Again, people of color particularly had a tough time, both at the national level and also in congregations. The first out gay ministers and the first Black ministers in predominantly white, straight UU congregations had a tough time, and some did wind up resigning because of insensitive treatment. And of course, if you're up on your recent Unitarian Universalist history, you may also know that things really came to a head in 2017. A Latina religious education director who lived in the southern region of the UUA was passed over for that region's lead position, and the UUA personnel director hired a white male minister who lived 1,000 miles away from the southern region and was told he would not have to relocate. Now, any objective observer had to see it as a suboptimal hiring process. And it blew up nationally, though, not so much because it was uniquely bad, it wasn't, but because resentment had been building among Unitarian Universalist professionals of color for more than a generation. We had a long record of hiring injustice and denial of the right to contest. And with no right to contest questionable actions, resentment does build, and conflict is sooner or later gonna result. And we've been working to figure out these dynamics and fix them ever since. Beloved though our 7 principles are. They're a product of the 1980s. They don't take into account what we've learned since then, not least about right relations with the diversity that's already among us. And that's why it's worth looking at the new Article 2 language through the lens of epistemic justice and the right to contest. The very concept of epistemic justice did not yet exist 40 years ago when we ratified the 7 principles. We've learned a lot since then. The values and the language around them are a next step in our evolving understanding of one another and how to be in right relations with people who are different from ourselves. So I'll vote for the revision, not because it's perfect, it's not, and not because it replaces our 7 principles. In my mind, it doesn't. But I want to take that next step forward into a more just and equal future. Human creativity can be a wonderful thing. And I love what happens when we take a hard look at the way we've always done things and make a few tweaks for the better. Our understanding of the world around us always is evolving. And we need to keep learning new ways if we want to keep up with that. Let us continue to evolve as our knowledge evolves. That's epistemic justice in a nutshell. Amen. May it be so.